Buju, Wago Shindigu, Migizi and Dodem, Gazagasqua Jimekag, Hindun Jiba. Hello, everybody. I've been getting a lot of questions lately about what a land acknowledgement is and how any kind of institution would go about establishing one. So, a land acknowledgement is a simple, brief statement about an institution or organization's acknowledgement of Indigenous people, their land tenure, and a commitment from the institution to seek justice and to right historical injustices. And the development of land acknowledgements has been going on for quite a few years now. I think accelerating after Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued findings that the country had engaged in cultural genocide against Indigenous people, specifically with the residential boarding schools that were developed for forcibly assimilating Native people in Canada. But it's since then spread, not just in Canada, but across the United States and in many other countries as well. So we've done one here at Bemidji State University, and they've been done in many other places as well. The nuts and bolts for a good land acknowledgement is, first of all, that it is local specific. So rather than a generic statement saying we acknowledge that there were Indigenous people who lived here, something specific. So in our area, our land acknowledgement includes specific language about the Ojibwe and Dakota. And depending on where you're at, there should be a specific mention of the tribes that are local to the area. Also, throughout history, Native people moved around even before Europeans showed up, and sometimes were moved around quite a bit afterwards as well. So in our area, for example, like the state of Minnesota where I live, we acknowledge the Ojibwe and the Dakota as Indigenous peoples of this land, but oftentimes an organization will acknowledge the Ho-Chunk, also known as Winnebago, who had reservations in Minnesota, will acknowledge groups like the Cheyenne and Hidatsa, who actually predated the Dakota in many parts of Minnesota. So depending on the circumstance and context, that's something to consider as well. So it should be local and it should be specific. Then, in addition to that, a good land acknowledgement will acknowledge historical injustice. So instead of saying, Indigenous people and everybody else hold hands and sing a version of this land is your land, this land is my land, there'll be an acknowledgement of historical injustice. And in addition to that, it's important to remember that as Native people, we are more than the sum of our tragedies. And so there should also be some sort of acknowledgement of contemporary Native existence and resiliency in a good land acknowledgement too. And there should be something specific to the institution in the form of a call to action. So rather than saying, yeah, Native people used to live here and we acknowledge that, okay, let's get on with our program, say these are the specific tribes who have called this place home throughout time and still do, to say, here are some of the historical injustices that they have endured. We acknowledge their contemporary existence and resiliency, and we as an institution are making a call to action to address injustice in all its forms. And those would be the nuts and bolts of a good land acknowledgement. The other piece to bear in mind is that in embarking on a land acknowledgement, it should also be brief. You don't want so many paragraphs that it's just cumbersome for anybody to read or use. So ideally, one paragraph should cover it, and short enough and with vocabulary also that is not so complicated that everybody can actually pick it up and use it and make sense of it, so that there isn't a requirement of deep historical understanding just to know what the land acknowledgement is saying. And the other really important thing to bear in mind in developing a land acknowledgement is that the process should be just as important as the final, remedy of developing the land acknowledgement. In other words, the conversations that are had about what should go in it and the specific details of the language will necessarily involve conversations with all of your stakeholders. So we just did one at Bemidji State University, and it was important that the president of the university was in the room and listening to the conversations and understood why we were doing it and what it was all about. It was important that some of the other staff and faculty were part of this process. And then we shared versions and drafts over time with various different constituent groups, stakeholders, staff, faculty, students, and made sure that everyone had a chance to directly engage, which not only was like due diligence with a process so that there was buy-in or something like that, but actually the land acknowledgement came from everybody, and it actually had meaning for everybody. So now when we have an event and we read our land acknowledgement and all of the faculty put it on their syllabi, we all know why we're doing it. And when questions pop up, as they, well, you get new students coming in all the time, then everyone will have the tools to provide an explanation of why we did it, what it really means, and how to use it in the future. Thank you very much. Miigwech. Thanks for watching today. I'm Anton Treuer. Let's keep in touch. I'm active on social media, and my website has lots of information on my books, speaking engagements, free Ojibwe language resources, resources for teachers, and more. Miigwech.